This is Infants on Thrones, the philosophies of men mingled with humor. We are the Quorum.
Hey listeners, Jake here. So, last weekend, the church released a video depiction of the first vision that acknowledged the many different accounts that Joseph Smith gave of that experience and claimed to incorporate them all into the video. Anyway, so what follows this week is the discussion that we had about it a few days ago. Now, we ended up going down a few rabbit holes, but during the discussion, Glenn had this great idea that we should narrate all the accounts that Joseph Smith gave and play them, back to back to back. So that's what we did. I mean, we have the discussion now, and then at the end, you'll hear these accounts as read by Glenn, Randy, and Bob. So, hope you enjoy.
About that. Yeah. F-bombs stay the same.
Oh, no, Matt's giving it up for Lent.
Oh, really?
No, I'm just not swearing on the podcast anymore.
Well, fuck you.
I'm gonna love you, Bob. Love you.
No,
that's what that was.
That's what it was.
All right.
Love you.
What is the possible point of intentionally not swearing and not using taboo words?
I love how offended Randy looks right now.
Randy's so confused.
He
Randy,
feels so
I think
condemned.
I think I said the F word today already, bro. I'm not ready.
Okay.
I'm as good
All right.
at Lent as most Catholics.
I wasn't going to just let that go if that was real.
No, I am trying to swear a little less in life, but
Especially on the podcast, because you don't want to.
especially on the podcast.
You don't want to offend people.
That's not why.
Why is it then? Because you don't want to like sully your message with language that people could not whether it's right or wrong. You know that some people are going to stop listening to what you have to say.
Yeah, I think it needs to be used a lot more judiciously, I would say.
Judicious swearing. That'd be a great episode.
Yeah, that's a good defense, because you could say it loses its effect, if you overuse it.
Yeah.
So, are we gonna start, man?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Poor Jake. It's like 10:33 on a work day
Oh, yeah, I'm the only one on the East Coast
in this group. Yeah.
in this group. Well, I work from home now, so that...
Oh well, then forget it. Then
You're right, yeah. Party, it's like...
For the
What's the league,
record,
guys?
USC plays UCLA tonight. I'm sacrificing that.
Wow! Holy cow!
Thank you.
But it's basketball. That's why you wouldn't if it was football.
But it's the I wouldn't if it was football. No. But it's a conference tournament.
Yeah.
Hey, Randy, you want to hear something weird?
Sure, always.
I'm off sports. I think I'm done with sports.
Really?
Weird.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I'm going to start doing that game that Bob plays now. No, I'm just kidding. But I
don't even know what it's called.
Diablo.
Yeah, Diablo. That's right. I listened to that episode and I liked it. I don't know. I really resonated with Bob it was a week or so ago. I tapped into Bob because I was sitting there. I was like, there was some game on or it was coming. And I was just like, man, I don't care. I watched no football this year except for basically the Super Bowl. I watched no baseball at all, including the World Series. I don't think I watched any basketball the year before last, and I get no S's about basketball this year.
I don't give two S's.
Way to use your language judiciously.
That's not an enhancement of your communication, man.
I don't know. We're all kind of enjoying it more than if he would have said shit.
Yeah, see, I'm happy you guys picked up on that. It was very intentional. But yeah, no, seriously. So then I realized it was 2 weeks ago. I was like, you know what? I really don't think. I think I'm done with sports. And then all of a sudden I was like, yeah, sports are kind of just stupid.
Yeah, well,
really
it just
drama.
But not as stupid as the people who like them, right?
No,
Like sports fans,
really,
they're the stupid ones.
Wait a minute. Where have I heard this before? It sounds really compelling.
Yeah.
Holy shit, that's Bob.
Well, I don't think it's.
All right, holy ass.
I think it's more than a coincidence that you gave up sports when every single team you have any rooting interest in sucks ass simultaneously.
Oh crap! I think you may have found one confounding variable in my theory. Yeah,
It's easy to let go of a bunch of losers.
that is true. When you're not competitive, it is very easy.
Yeah,
But that being said, the more I was analyzing it, I was thinking, okay, why do we like sports? It's we have these loyalties and there's characters, and we like the excitement. I said, well, really, it's just really pretty shitty drama when there's a lot of really good television out there that I could spend my time doing instead. I don't know.
Amen, brother.
The Super Bowl this year was awesome, though. Like from as a sports spectacle, it was incredible.
Did anyone see the Rose Bowl?
I was more excited
watching
for
one
Lady
per
Gaga,
year.
dude.
Exactly, Lady Gaga.
It's true.
All right.
Oh, okay. All right. So,
Podcast.
yeah. We don't have a sports podcast. Stick to what you know, infants.
Suck at politics.
So the context for this is on, what was it? I think it was last Saturday. There was this YouTube live streaming thing between with elders Holland and Eyring, I think it was. Anyway, prior to that, they said, "Oh, we're going to show." There's a new First Vision video that we'll be showing, and interestingly enough, it opens with a black screen. And then some text comes down and it says, between 1832 and
1844, Joseph Smith and some of his closest friends recorded at least 9 accounts of Joseph's first vision experience, given on different occasions to different audiences. The most detailed of these accounts, written in 1838, has been published in a volume of scripture called the Pearl of Great Price. What you're about to see draws upon all of the written First Vision accounts to provide additional perspectives and insights into this remarkable event.
I love how they say a scripture known as the Pearl of Great Price, as if the audience reading this wouldn't just know what the Pearl of Great Price is. It's like, oh, well, there might be non-members that we're speaking to. Yeah, probably not. Probably not.
Well, because of you, Glenn, every time anyone uses the word remarkable, it doesn't mean anything to me anymore. It's like,
something that you can remark
about
on. Yeah.
I thought it would. We all thought it would be interesting to talk about this new video, which does differ from the typical account. I mean, you don't have that one passage that's in Preach My Gospel that was in all of the missionary discussions that all the missionaries memorized.
I saw a pillar of light above the brightness of the sun, which descended gradually until it fell upon me. When the light rested upon me, I saw 2 personages whose brightness and glory defy all description. One of them spake unto me, calling me by name, and said, pointing to the other,
Joseph, this is my beloved son. Hear him.
As the description of the first vision was conspicuously absent from this video. Anyway, so Glenn suggests that we read through the first vision accounts of the first vision essay on LDS.org and use that kind of as a springboard to talk about, what exactly do all these different accounts? Yeah.
But both the essay on LDS.org that we'll be reading and the new video are kind of catering to this new information age of the internet version of the church, where they're like, oh yes, okay, we're going to acknowledge up to a point that there are some problems. There are some things that people have problems with, and there are actually multiple versions of the first vision. So they're coming out, they're saying that in this essay, they're saying that in the video as an inoculation technique, right? Probably. But also in response to people finding things on the internet.
Yeah.
Right. But they don't do it. I mean, they don't admit anything. They don't admit anything. They still say it as if, matter of factly, of course, there's multiple versions of everything out there. Yeah. Duh.
Well, we'll give you the problem and the solution, Bingo, right here.
right, all together.
So this is why it doesn't need to be a problem for you.
You know,
Which,
I was thinking about this
I don't think it does
inoculation
need to be a
thing.
problem, but anyway.
There's their inoculation technique. I think I always wondered how effective it would be because, you know, doesn't it just expose other people to facts that they wouldn't otherwise know? But I think it's just calculated that they can inoculate the young. That's really who they're targeting. Those who are just kind of that haven't really just been fed one version necessarily, or just young enough to I don't know to be inoculated, I guess. And they just figure the other ones that are already in, that are older, we can do anything. They're like, you know, there is nothing we can't reveal or say, and these people aren't going to leave if they haven't left by now. So I wonder how much of a calculated risk they do on some of this stuff when it comes to disclosing some of this heretofore unused material.
Yeah,
I mean, because Richard Bushman is the biggest example. I mean, he did his rough stone rolling. His philosophy was inoculation, and it's been a mixed bag for people, including myself. Richard Bushman is the one who started my faith crisis. So you run the risk of exposing people to things that otherwise wouldn't ever find it, because this is like on LDS.org. But I understand the theory behind inoculation, because if you, like Glenn said, present the problem and the solution at the same time, it's better than if they just find the problem somehow on their own.
Wait, but was Richard Bushman, was his reasoning really inoculation? Because that's like a mean thing to say. That sort of lowers his credibility, because comparing him to LDS.org is like apples and oranges. Like he's inoculation light, right? I mean, he was actually trying to be a historian first and foremost.
Yeah, but he didn't hide like the troublesome stuff in his book Rough Stone Rolling. And
first and foremost, he was a believer, and that came out in everything.
Okay, I mean,
that's probably paragraph that came
because any kind of potential thing. He was also kind of giving here's the problem, but here's the solution light. And like I don't think he was going as heavy as some of these others that you mentioned, but I do. You know, there were times where he made it very clear that he's a believer and has reverence for Joseph Smith and his history, and he talked about some difficult things, but I don't think.
But it was. I mean, yes, it like that perspective as a believer came in, but within the context of like an actual accredited historian doing good history, in that he represented the facts correctly. He referenced primary accounts. It's just like so he would lay out this case of like, oh, there's, all these people in the area were also having first, visionary experiences like Joseph Smith. So that just shows that the power of God was working on these people. Like his interpretation at the end was like, that's where like the believer lens really shone through. Because one other obvious conclusion you could draw is he was cribbing it. He was just doing something that was like a cultural meme.
Yeah, it was tapping into the same tradition that everybody was.
Exactly. And it backfired. Yeah. It really backfired, because I mean, if your answer every time is, "Oh, everyone was fucking it up, just like him, like Joseph," it's all good. Burnt over district. I mean, anything went, and it was a whole new experience for everyone to try new stuff. I remember as a believer, I was like, "Wait, what? That can't be the party line answer as to why things that I thought didn't exist really do exist, but for a good reason. That's not a very good reason." But
maybe
anyway.
Our elephants were headed in that direction anyway.
Oh, the elephants and the riders. Yes.
See, I you might be just joking about the Jonathan Haidt stuff, but I'm not. Really I really have changed the way that I feel about the multiple versions of the first vision because of that book, and to the point where I just don't think that it really even it's a big deal. So like we're talking about, I think the way you phrased it, Matt, was did the church somehow intentionally take a calculated risk, or are they taking a calculated risk in inoculating people, specifically on this first vision, multiple accounts, or maybe on other things? And I just don't see it being a calculated risk, because they don't, first of all, see that there's any problem with having multiple versions. It's not like they're like, oh shit, they've got us here, quick, let's scramble the wagons and figure out, or circle the wagons, So I don't think that's going on.
You don't think that's they don't. No. They're not aware that this is a problem for a lot of people?
Oh, but that's different than what I said. I don't think that they see that it really is a problem. I think that they know that people have claimed that as a problem, and so what they want to do is go. But I think the solutions that they're offering are very sincere. It's what they actually believe, and they really don't see a problem. So they're not being like underhanded and trying to pass this off as legit when they don't really think it's legit. No, they think it's legit. And the way that the height part comes in is that third section with the hive mentality, that the importance of being in social groups, and those social groups being bound together by beliefs. This is a classic origin myth that the first vision is. It establishes the authority of Joseph Smith. It establishes the authority of the Mormon Church. This is like the foundational creation myth in Mormonism. And, I think members want to believe it. I think they're inclined to believe it. And, there's that part that Haidt talks about, the brain using, was it oxytocin as a way to reward you for doing good things. And that's one of the things that he talks about as a hive switch. We talked about earlier before we started recording. So I think there's actually things in here that people want to believe, and that so having multiple versions isn't really that big of a deal, unless you stack it up with a bunch of other things. But this in isolation by itself,
but it is a deal. I mean, I think that. I think that there is a tacit acknowledgement that the details of this account have become part of the origin myth itself.
Right, of course.
So when the details contradict the message or the takeaway that you're supposed to get from this origin myth, like here's what I'm saying. If nobody knew that there were, if it wasn't easily or readily available, the fact that there are multiple visions of the multiple accounts of the first vision, I don't think they ever would have made this version of the video.
Right.
And they lead with almost like an apologetic line there, where they say there are multiple accounts told at different times to different people,
different audiences,
and to different audiences. And right there, they're putting up a defense that, hey, when you tell a story that happened to you, and the audience changes, your story changes a little bit to suit the audience. That's all. That was the apologetics I always heard as a member. If that wasn't,
but it's true,
prime motivation, why do they lead with that?
Because they're offering the solution.
That is true.
I have a question for you. I was just going to ask if this is really what they intentionally believe, and it's not that they're being nefarious and trying to pull one over on believers or whatever, then they would be able to write this pretty quickly and all come to an agreement independently of each other, and they would all have the same opinion, right? But that's not the reality. The reality is this is written by committee and goes through tons of revisions, and is wordsmithed like to the nth degree. That's how they work as a business run enterprise first.
Yeah.
And so I guess it's hard for me to reconcile your new perspective of they're a bunch of nice guys and this is what they really believe, when they're super, super careful and they actually disagree as much as they agree. We just don't see the behind the scenes markings of how this came to be.
So one of the things that I did for several years early in my career, where I worked for a medical device company and I worked in the regulatory department, and the job of regulatory is to demonstrate to the FDA that the products are safe and effective. And so there's all kinds of testing and there's different requirements, and these submissions are written by committee, not by a single person. There's a lot of testing data that's in there. They're gone over very careful with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that the message is right for what this audience, the FDA, is expecting to see from us. Just because it's going through committee and they're being really careful in the way that they craft the message doesn't mean that it isn't true. We're not fabricating data that we're submitting to the FDA. We're being very careful with it when we're doing it. And so
selectively leaving stuff out, right?
No, not selectively leaving stuff out, but selectively demonstrating what the requirements say, for a regulatory submission. But so in this case, I really don't think that the fact that it's being written through committee, that they're reviewing it, making sure that it jives with all of the first presidency or whoever has final sign off on it, I don't think that's an indication of nefarious intent or ulterior motives. Just that they recognize that this is an important thing, and they don't want anything cavalier or careless to go out.
Well,
but just because they believe it or not being nefarious doesn't mean that there's no recognition that there is something inherently contradictory about the way that people perceive the importance of the first vision and the message and what the first vision indicated about the narrative of the restoration and the contradictions between the different accounts of that vision.
I don't know what you're saying.
The stakes have been put very high with President Hinckley's quote when he said, either Joseph Smith had this vision, like he said, or he didn't. If he did, this is the most important work on the planet. And if he didn't, this church is a fraud. Is what he said.
Greatest fraud ever perpetrated on the earth.
Thank you.
Right,
Thank
but
you,
but
exactly.
but that was largely rhetorical. So with there was something
you just waved it by saying rhetorical.
What do you mean? That's just largely rhetorical.
What Hinckley was saying, it was a rhetorical device.
You're saying
it was an attaboy.
Seriously, not literally.
Yeah, no, it was meant. Like the scale is totally tipped in the wink side of it's all true. We know it's all true. We know that this is the one that it is, you guys. So it's just slapping you on the back and validating how true it is. So that's why I'm saying it was a rhetorical statement. He didn't really mean it. That way.
But this is an in-group message too. This video is an in-group message as well.
Right. But
so it's just a rhetorical device. It's not. They don't really believe it. It's not real. And
okay, maybe I'm arguing a different point than you. I thought that we were talking about whether the brethren know that this is false, and so they're presenting it in a way to try and convince people that it's not.
I'm not taking that
kind of nefarious thing.
Oh.
No, my position is that they absolutely believe it's true.
Yeah.
And they're irritated that they have to deal with things that aren't a problem for them, but are a problem for a huge number of their members that are leaving.
But
they don't understand why it's a problem. Like if you go and talk, just pick out 3 people at random at a church emptying on Sunday and ask them why someone would leave the church over multiple accounts of the first vision, they're going to think, I don't know. No idea. No clue.
But if it's not a big deal, how come it's not always been this way?
Exactly.
Because they're slow to react to problems in the world.
It wasn't a big deal. It is.
Yes, you did. That's what you said.
No, you did. You said they don't think it's a big deal.
20 minutes and say
they don't think it's a big deal.
You literally just said that.
Well, okay. Well, if I said it wasn't a big deal, then what I meant was when I was leaving the church, it wasn't one of the main reasons why I left the church. And I've never heard anybody who left the church solely because there were multiple accounts of the first vision. This is always one of those things that gets tacked on to give more credibility to the other things. But this in and of itself, to me, is not a big deal in the sense of like a smoking gun that the church is not true. Like the Book of Abraham, I would say that's a big deal, like a big problem. But the fact that there are multiple versions of the first vision account can be chalked up to what they're saying that it is. That when there's different audiences, you present information in different ways. There really aren't a lot of contradictions between what Joseph Smith himself said happened in these different accounts. There are when you start looking at some of the things that who was it, Willard Chase, or the other people said, where they're like, oh, it was a spirit, or it was a frog, or it was whatever. But I don't think there's a ton of discrepancies in what Joseph said about it in these first accounts.
Well, I mean, the biggest discrepancy, the best way to look at them is in chronological order, and it's just like a fish story. It gets better with each new version, and Joseph gets way more important with each new version. And the only ones that talk about Joseph talking about this in the 1830s, all of those are from the mid 1840s. Those didn't so the fish story just got better and better, and that's where it's probably. I don't think that this is most people's smoking gun, but I think it's a few people's pebble that starts the avalanche. and very few people leave for one reason. Like, it's usually just, for me, polyandry was just the beginning. I didn't leave the church for 4 years after I learned about polyandry. So I think this is important because it's the foundational story, and it has just this classic archetype of a foundational story that gets better with age and actually gets more detailed with age. And that's not how it works. That's not how the memory works.
Yeah, but Glenn, you're right that it's not in the top 3 normally. Even it's like it's tacked on all the time. I've never heard anybody say the first vision is the reason they left. It's always like, oh yeah, and that too.
Well, I'm sure we're going to have a lot of listeners in the comments saying otherwise. But
that's true. Sure.
But I think the real inoculation was the New Testament or the Gospels, because those are different, and that I think at some point Mormons have encountered that, at least in seminary, even or in a gospel doctrine class where they're clearly different, and then it's an easy explanation that Mark's audience was this, and that's why there was this, kind of explaining that. So there is this built-in, I guess, inoculation to that I think is applied to the first vision. So to that extent, I think, yeah, it's not everybody. I'll just echo what everybody else said.
All right. So paragraph 2, or are we on 1?
Yeah, I don't think we've even started reading this yet.
Oh, okay.
I know.
Okay. No, I mean, it's been good. I just wasn't sure if that was what we're going to get to.
Go ahead, Bob.
Do you want me to start reading?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So this is the first paragraph of what's on LDS.org that accompanies the video. Joseph Smith recorded that God the Father and Jesus Christ appeared to him in a grove of trees near his parents' home in Western New York State when he was about 14 years old.
See, and they use the word "about" there to cover up that some of them say 16, some of them say 12.
But yeah. also, I mean, they lead with the fact that is one of the facts that's in dispute among these accounts of the first vision, which is God the Father and Jesus Christ. In fact, it's right. That's one of the most important points that is stressed in this narrative, and that's one of the facts that's in dispute. So I think it is important.
Well, but they didn't. No, they didn't, because they didn't say Joseph Smith recorded in every single one of the versions that that God and Jesus appeared to him. He did record that,
but so they fudge about 14 years old. So they put language in there to add ambiguity around his age, right. But there's no ambiguity about who was there, even though there is a lot of ambiguity about who was there when you look at the different accounts.
Right, because they're trying to say, let's not focus so much on the word for word text of the accounts. Let's focus on what really happened. And we know through our modern prophets and Revelation what really happened. So we're going to tell you what really happened, and then there's these multiple versions of the vision that you piece them together and you get the whole picture. And that's the mindset.
I know, but that's the mentality. What I'm saying is by couching it that way, you are acknowledging that there's an issue with the core narrative when you look at the actual documents from which that narrative is taken.
You say you're not acknowledging that? Is that what you're saying?
No, they are acknowledging that. I mean, the fact that you have to couch it that way. I mean, your explanation of, let's just say we know what really happened. These are the parts that are important, even though some of these are in dispute. We know what really happened. We'll tell you what really happened. And then these other things that we have deemed unimportant, but also are ambiguous, they can be allowed to continue to be ambiguous.
So here's where I get confused, and maybe where we get derailed a little bit, because you just like switched into, I'm going to speak from their perspective. So you're kind of like church whispering. Right? And then you say, I'm going to present these facts, even though they're in dispute, this parenthetical insertion, even though they're in dispute. And that's like Jake inserting into the internal dialogue of the church leader whisperers, because the church leader whisperers are not thinking, even though they're in dispute, because they don't think they're in dispute. They think that there's like feckless people who have left the church that have problems with that. But that's not the same thing as being in dispute, as it's not a fact. It's just those people that choose to be offended and choose to go off and sin, or choosing to make this an issue that isn't really an issue. So I don't think that they think that it's in dispute, but you presented it as if you think that they think that it's in dispute.
Yeah, but there's evidence to basically, I think that there's an acknowledgement on their part that there is a reason that people think that this is in dispute, and that's why we have these documents where they say, okay, let's go back to let's walk through all the different accounts and see what they all say and acknowledge them. Let's print them all in their entirety somewhere where people can go read them. I mean, if it really wasn't in dispute, if there really was nothing there, if they really didn't think it was a problem at all they would say is, Joseph Smith saw God, end of story, that's it.
Or if they don't think that it's really a problem, but they know that some people, it's a problem to them.
Yeah, exactly. I'm
right.
not saying that they are sitting there and we know that this is not true, but we're going to tell people. But I think there is an acknowledgement that people actually have real doubts based on real tangible pieces of evidence that we need to address.
Yeah.
So what's the go-to apologetics for, I'm telling a story, and in this story there was one person that was involved, and then the next time I tell the story, there are two people there. I mean, let's ask Matt, the lawyer, if you're on the stand and you testify to what happened in an event, and then the first time you tell it, there's one person, and then the second time you're like, yeah, and then the two people, and you're like, whoa, when you first said it, there was only one person, and you just say oh, I never said there wasn't a second person. I was just focusing on one. Is that the apologetic answer?
Yeah, and it happens all the time. But what it comes down to is you have to not just say, well, it was to different people at a different place or a different time, but it's really what was the purpose there. So, for example, it makes sense that a witness would tell the first officer a truncated version of it, right? Because they're just getting very, it's one quick little statement, blah, 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 blah. And, or a quick written statement. But then when they flesh it out through an interview process, it's going to change and develop a little bit because they'll remember better. They'll get more details. So that's what that's when people say it's inconsistent. It's not. But stuff, what you just described, no, that's a bad argument ultimately, because that's substantive. Well, wait a minute. You would expect to at least get right the two people. And my problem with that argument as it relates to the Joseph Smith story is, I think I think if God was there, I'd be pretty clear that it was Jesus and God. It wasn't just the Lord or whatever on the first one. And that's my problem with it, is he leaves out what would be the climax, I guess, or the punchline in every one of those stories. Oh yeah, by the way, God the Father was there too. I think that would always be a piece that would be included.
But you're thinking that based on your own preferences, because that's how you would do it in that situation.
No, I'm talking about what I think human nature is.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
You think it makes a lot of sense for it first to be and I agree with what Randy said about the chronology of it, and when you take the story in context with the time of it, that's when it makes it that's when it becomes inconsistent.
Well, and the naturalistic alternative explanation for the 1832 account written by Joseph Smith's own, grammatically incompetent hand, he's Trinitarian. So of course, only one God would show up.
Right.
And then when his theology changes, then the story changes. So it's much more likely that he's just some guy making up a story than,
And when it gets most grand in the part where he has the most authority is when he's in the most trouble and people are fleeing him. So the timing of that story, the one that ultimately becomes canon in the scripture that is known as the Pearl of Great Price, is when has a real incentive to say, oh, by the way, God declared me to be boss, so quit leaving and not, and all these apostles are leaving and stay here, please. I mean, that was really, so that's what, but that requires a lot of layers and context that I guess the rank and file members really aren't going to do.
Yeah. All right, I'll keep reading. Okay, so concerned by his sins and unsure which spiritual path to follow, Joseph sought guidance by attending meetings, reading scripture, and praying. 3 patterns. In answer, he received a heavenly manifestation. Joseph shared and documented the first vision, as it came to be known, on multiple occasions. He wrote or assigned scribes to write 4 different accounts of the vision. Anything else we want to comment on there? Should we keep going?
You can keep going.
All right, Jake, do you want to do paragraph 2?
Sorry, things broke up there for me a little bit. Got it.
Oh,
okay, I'm ready. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Coming in a little.
Does anybody hear into that feedback?
All right. So you want somebody else take the next paragraph?
Matt, do you want to take it?
Joseph Smith published 2 accounts of the first vision during his lifetime. The first of these, known today as Joseph Smith history, was canonized in the Pearl of Great Price, and thus became the best-known account. The 2 unpublished accounts, recorded in Joseph Smith's earliest autobiography and a later journal, were generally forgotten until historians working for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints rediscovered and published them in the 1960s. Since that time, these documents have been discussed repeatedly in church magazines, in works printed by church-owned and church-affiliated presses, and by Latter-day Saint scholars and other venues.
Yeah,
and it's
so okay. Yeah. I just have to point out, the other people outside of your bubble discuss these too. It's not just approved people that we agree with in the world discuss this. End of story. It's church-owned, church-affiliated. It's just so funny that they put these weird adjectives in as if there's nothing to see here. Nobody else talked about this. I don't know.
Well, I think it's we're not doing this because other people are talking about it. We've always talked about it.
Okay. I got
Well, and it's funny because they could have just said have been discussed repeatedly in the church. But right. I mean, I think this was your point, Bob. But now they're breaking it down in church magazines and church-owned and affiliated presses and Latter-day Saint scholars and other venues. It's lots and lots of people, not just the church.
It's a way to describe. No, it's a way to describe an extremely niche amount of people to make it sound, as if, it's so huge. There were 3 people here that never read this, and there was this one guy here over here.
I just don't understand how saying Mormons have talked about their own theology in many different, forms for years and years. How does that bolster your position?
That's not convincing to you, is it, Randy?
No. For some reason, I can't put my finger on it.
In addition to the first-hand accounts, there are also 5 descriptions of Joseph Smith's vision recorded by his contemporaries.
Sounds great.
Do I sound better?
Yeah, you sound great. You want to read the next paragraph?
Sure. The various accounts of the first vision tell a consistent story, though naturally they differ in emphasis and detail. Historians expect that when an individual retells an experience in multiple settings to different audiences over many years, each account will emphasize various aspects of the experience and contain unique details. Indeed, differences similar to those in the first vision accounts exist in multiple scriptural accounts of Paul's vision on the road to Damascus and the apostles' experience on the Mount of Transfiguration. In addition, sorry, I was going to ad-lib there, but I didn't really have anything to back it up. It was just interesting that they pointed to two other
inconsistencies in the New Testament.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
It's the Christians too. Hubbard's first experience with the Thetans was also disputed in many different contexts. So
they do this all the time with when they feel like they're getting attacked for having inconsistencies in their theology. They always go, "Well, look at the Christians. They have." They believe crazy things too. It's not just
everyone's doing it.
That doesn't help here.
Trump's Twitter feed. Come on, guys. It's in vogue.
Oh, that's getting edited out.
I'm sorry. Sorry.
Mention
of that.
Come on.
I'm sorry.
All right.
We're doing Mormonism again.
Okay, so and here we get with the defensive language. Although I'm not going to editorialize this too much.
No, go ahead. Yes, I want to hear your editorializations.
Well, I'll wait until I actually read it.
Okay.
Yet, despite the differences, a basic consistency remains across all the accounts of the first vision. Some have mistakenly argued that any variation in the retelling of the story is evidence of fabrication. To the contrary, the rich historical record enables us to learn more about this remarkable event than we could if it were less well documented.
I don't have a problem with that. I can accept that completely.
So
I mean, except for the assumptions. I mean, they're saying like this remarkable event as if it happened. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying it happened. I'm saying that, you know, where they say that people have mistakenly argued that any variation in the retelling of a story is evidence of fabrication. That is a true statement. That is a mistake to think that variation in the telling of a story is evidence of fabrication.
But when the variation is in the same type of when the same types of variation are made in unidirectionally over time, meaning it becomes more embellished over time, that is evidence of that. And when you watch the thread of this account be continue to be embellished over time, and then the one that you've taken and put into your missionary manuals and telling, you know, people that you're trying to convince to join your church, that account is the last of those accounts. That is a problem.
So but Jake, you're arguing not against something else. You're not arguing against what the actual statement of the sentence is, which I agree with Glenn is true. So like if you had 3 people that were giving an alibi, for instance, I'm gonna invoke Matt to correct me if I'm totally off here. But if you have 3 people that are giving an alibi for someone who is a suspect in a crime, and all 3 of them tell the story way too uniformly, doesn't that raise suspicion?
Yeah, but they're different people, though.
Well, I mean,
but when you talk about uniformly, I think this is important. It's when they use the same language, like specific, like we were walking furiously down the road, and then the other one would be like, you know, we were on the road walking furiously, and you still these through lines. You're like, that's that's collusion or whatever. It's not when they're particularly consistent. But now if they're off, the other thing is if you're off on things like, or you're particularly consistent on times. How long was it? 7 minutes, and everybody's 7 minutes. Well, that's odd. Nobody would estimate a time like that, you know, to the moment. So that's the when you're saying overly consistent, but you know, being similarly being hypercritical about inconsistencies. You know, one guy says 7 minutes, the other guy says 10 minutes. Is that really that big of a difference? You know. Well,
Jake, even if you had the same witness and you had them at the scene of the crime and they tell the original story. And then a couple of weeks goes by and they give their official statement to the detectives. Then a couple of months goes by, and that one is exactly the same as the first one. And then they go to court, and the story is uber consistent. Then I would think that would raise suspicion that this is a rehearsed story.
So what you're saying is that this sentence of some have mistakenly argued that any variation in the retelling of a story is evidence of fabrication. Okay, I agree. I agree with that.
It's any variation, but your argument is completely valid. That when you look at the direction of the consistencies,
it's not.
No, you disagree, Glenn?
I mean, just go ahead and finish your thought so people know what I'm disagreeing with.
When you contextualize each story with his theology at the time and what was going on in his life at the time, and then as you consistently see that he becomes more important, Satan becomes more. You know, the fight with Satan becomes more dramatic. His authority gets more and more established.
See, I'm going to disagree with all of those elements, and you sent us in preparation for this a really great chart. It's got like an x-axis with all, it's what, like how many, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different versions, and then like a y-axis with all these different elements of the story, and you can see going down from the top to the bottom, like if it's true what you're saying, that this thing scales up and gets more and more exaggerated and Joseph Smith becomes more self-important, you would see that in the way that this chart's lined out. But actually the very first one, that was the 1831 to 32 version, has as many, all except for one of the columns are filled in that you have at the bottom, the 1842.
Yeah, but you have to look at the words.
You got to look at the bottom.
I know.
That's difficult. You have to look at the words.
So tell me, Jake, which words are this gross exaggeration? Because I see a difference in that. He says that he saw and spoke to the Lord, but that's only one person, and then the other one there's 2 personages. So you go from 1 person to 2. And you've got 2 accounts that have 1 person and 3 accounts with 2 people. That's not a huge variation that keeps scaling up and up and up with each telling.
It is when his theology changes from Trinitarian to this Godhead thing.
And also, the earlier accounts don't say you're the person that's going to bring back you're the person that's going to bring back the true restored gospel of Jesus Christ.
So let me.
I mean, in the earlier accounts, it's like all your sins are forgiven. Go thy way. Go ahead, Randy.
I just want to clarify. I'm not saying that you cannot come to the reasonable conclusion that this is a manufactured story and it scales up. That absolutely is a legitimate conclusion to come to. It's the one that I've come to. I think you guys have as well. All I'm trying to say is it's not unreasonable to not see it that way. It's not like they must be drinking or eating crazy pills or whatever the thing is. It's not that strange for people to go.
Articulating that way, I agree with Glenn.
Yeah.
Can I make a different point?
He's saying that we're saying that people are crazy if they don't see this, but people don't. Motivated reasoning is a powerful thing, and they're not going to take an objective outsider's take on it. You'd almost have to have someone who doesn't know anything about Mormonism and give them the details to get a read on.
Well, that would be an interesting experiment, because I wonder how many people that didn't have any kind of, like, if they were going into this without any bias about the truth claims of the Mormon Church, so if they went in and they think, or even religion or metaphysics in general, if they think right off the start that it's impossible that God and Jesus would appear to anyone, then they're not going to give even the different scaled up versions a chance. There's going to be a bias behind it. But
if you don't believe that the Thetans can inhabit your body, you're not going to believe that there's no way they're going to believe L. Ron Hubbard's story. I mean, I just saying that if you set the baseline at what the in-group already accepts, like I'm not confused that people can read the different accounts of the first vision and say, yeah, okay, things change a little bit, but that's okay. But I think that they're doing that because they have a strong emotional connection to the church.
Yeah.
And this isn't a big enough break to jostle them. And
they get oxytocin whenever they affirm their beliefs.
Can we somebody put a ding every time Glenn references Jonathan Haidt?
I feel like we opened some floodgates.
Yeah. I want to look at one other thing, though. In the way this sentence is worded, some have mistakenly argued that any variation in the retelling of the story is evidence of fabrication. I take issue with the fact that they're saying any variation, because that's not what's being argued if in the same document you use the word consistency 5 times. So the way that really should be worded, what they're really saying is some have mistakenly argued that when there are a lot of inconsistencies in the retelling of the story, there's evidence of fabrication, which is true. That's what we do argue. But it's a straw man to say that any variation, that's not the same thing as lots and lots of inconsistencies. And I hate the sleight of hand.
That's a good point, Bob.
What I'll say in defense of Glenn's point, I think, is that it does feel like we're having to do a lot of work to break this down or to criticize it. So it sounds like we're being a little hypercritical, because you really do have to say, okay, in this particular context, this is what he believed, and so let's go to this, and then and here's what it says. So it really is requiring a lot of work to say here's where the consistency is. But if I do look at that chart, I am persuaded that they're a lot more similar than if you were to look at that chart and what is said in context of what we understand his theology to be at the time. So that's an important piece, but it does require a little bit of work for in order to parse that out. So I certainly see how it wouldn't be very persuasive, and the other one of different retellings at different times is.
So let me give each one of us here a challenge after we're done with this, and maybe we could take like a Lowry Letters approach to this, and each one of us take one of those main 5 versions that they're talking about here of the first vision and read them and record it.
Oh boy, you realize how hard it will be to read the 1832 version? It is the worst.
Then I'll take that one.
Syntax, and
I'll be happy to take that one then.
There's no punctuation.
I'll figure it out. But I mean, do you guys want to do that? And that could be like an Easter egg. I mean, it doesn't have to people have to wade through that. But if they want to hear them and be, because who's going to go away from a podcast and go, I'm going to go read all of these versions and compare them side by side? But they may listen if we do it.
Yeah, a dramatized.
Sure, we should do that.
More interesting. But and to be fair,
Joseph Smith, the First Vision musical.
Yeah, well, let's not complicate it to the point we're not going to do it.
and to be
like Reed Smoot.
To try to have some kind of intellectual honesty, we have to admit that we have our own biases that we're dealing with.
You mentioned. Sorry, I feel like I'm interrupting. We mentioned that this is always a
you kept going.
Yeah, well, I
feel like I'm steamrolling over you right now. It's like this.
So let me keep going.
I feel like I'm punching you in the face, but I'm going to keep moving my arm with a clenched fist in this direction.
I'm going to just do this.
It feels like I'm punching your face. But I don't want to stop.
Right. Everyone mentioned that this is kind of a tack on after you've got major issues, and maybe that's part of it. This is another confirmatory thing. It's never a big thing, but you take it, and after
it's one more brick in the wall.
Yeah, but it's.
I know people that this has been a catalyst for, and
really?
And I actually had one of my somebody in my immediate family was like, this is super shocking to them. When they learned that there were multiple accounts of the first vision, they were like, why did I spend all that time memorizing that one passage? And I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that there were two personages. One of them was Jesus and one of them was God the Father. I think that is a very important point. And I think the fact that isn't in all of the accounts, I mean, I think that's really the
crux of it all.
Exactly, the crux of it all, because that is the takeaway from the narrative. That's one of the main takeaways from the narrative that's been pounded into our brains for, conference after conference after conference, that this proved the nature of the Godhead and Joseph Smith's mantle as the person that was going to restore the true Church of Christ. And so the fact that you memorize this passage that contains that key fact, that key takeaway, that is one of the facts that doesn't make it across all the accounts and only becomes inserted as over time. It's one of the later accounts that has it. The earlier accounts don't have God the Father.
Yeah, it doesn't show up till 1838. People.
I mean, I think that does matter. I don't know. I feel like, am I crazy for thinking that that's an important part of this narrative?
No, you've been told that your entire life. Of course you're going to think that.
Well, do you think that it's an important part of the narrative?
Not in the way that you do. Tell me
the way that I do.
No, well, the way that you stated is that the narrative functions on two important levels. One, that it establishes the authority of Joseph Smith, which each one of these versions does. And two, that it establishes the nature of the godhood, which only 3 of the 5 versions that we looked in front of us did. But so, and that's where, if you're telling different audiences and you have different things in mind when you're telling the story, if all you're trying to do is establish your authority, you don't really need to focus on whether it was the Lord and the Father, and he's like, hear him, he sees both of them. But in later ones where it becomes more important to you for whatever reason, maybe your theology changes, like Randy was talking about, then you would emphasize that one. But if we could imagine that there were multiple versions of the first vision and they were all absolutely consistent, there wasn't any variation at all between any of them, would that be evidence that would make us, any of us here, consider going back to the church? The answer is no,
so
guys.
Everything else is the same.
The answer is no.
Everything else is the same. Okay, all right, yeah. All right.
And that's why to me, like, arguing over the details of the differences in these, like, it's so reasonable to me, coming from a background where I studied stories and variation between stories. It's so reasonable for me to look at this and go, there's nothing strange. There's no smoking gun in here. I can dismiss this. There's so many other things that demonstrate that the church isn't true and what it says it is.
So what if the Book of Abraham was remarkably similar to Egyptian? What if the translation of the Book of Abraham was within the parameters of accuracy with regards to Egyptian, would you go back to Mormonism?
I would seriously have to relook at everything, because that was one of the foundational things for me. Like when there were a lot of reasons why I was like wary of the church and not happy with church stuff. But when I found that out, that was kind of like it gave me permission to go, oh, this really is made up. There's proof that this is made up. So I would have to go back and look at that and some of the other things. And what it might make me is one of those people that believe in Joseph Smith, like the Rock Waterman group, that I believe in the restoration, but that the modern church is in apostasy. It might take me to some place like that, but I don't know.
Well, there's a fundamental difference, though. Like if the first vision accounts were consistent, then it's just a guy being consistent about a story he made up.
Sure, right.
Whereas with
where's your evidence? Where's your textual?
Can I finish? If he lived at a time, and he did, when nobody could translate Egyptian, and then he translated Egyptian, that's empirical evidence that there's something going on here.
Yeah.
That's a totally different ballgame. It's a totally different animal than the first vision account.
I want to go back. I want to go back to the part that I was interrupting Randy, and he told me to stop.
I just wanted to finish my thought for one.
I know, no, you were right. I shouldn't have done that. But if each one, if the details of all of the text were the same, then what's your basis for saying that it's just a made up story?
Well, I mean, the Book of Abraham.
No. But we're talking about the first vision, liar. Right? We're saying the first vision. If each one of the versions of the first vision were identical, you said it would just be identical versions of a made up story.
But then
because
Glenn,
of the Book of Abraham, because he's
Glenn, couldn't we reverse the question and say, why don't you believe anything that anyone ever says?
What?
So you're saying Joseph Smith's first vision story, if it was consistent, why wouldn't you believe it?
No.
The only reason
I'm not asking why wouldn't you believe it. I mean, like, how do you know for sure that it's not true? When it's like what we're doing right now is we're looking at the details from the inconsistency and the variation in the details and going, oh, this is indication of a fabrication. So if you take that away, then what is your indication of a fabrication? And it would just be, I don't believe in angels. I don't believe in God.
But okay, so this was not a catalyst. This wasn't even in my top 10.
No.
But once I didn't believe anymore, because he's such a proven fraud in every other way, with polyandry and the shenanigans he pulled off with other guys' wives, and the Book of Abraham and the Book of Mormon just being a pile of shit, anachronistic fan fiction shit. Then I come across the first vision.
It's fan fiction S.
And then I come across the first vision, and I'm like, this is interesting. It wasn't critical in my deconversion, and it wouldn't be critical in reconverting me. Well, it's just something to look at.
But I think that this is something that basically, I just feel like, Glenn, you're looking at this and saying, oh, this isn't worthy of being somebody's cattle. I mean, this isn't worthy of really evaluating the truth claims of Mormonism based off the first vision. And I just disagree with that, because
I disagree with that too. Yeah, that if that's what I've come across, saying that this isn't worthy of being a reason for somebody, like I thought that when I said that it's very reasonable for somebody to study this and come to the conclusion that it's not true. So I would link into that to say, okay, I'm going to leave the church, and this is one of the reasons why. So I don't think it's
but you worthy. You just asked everybody, okay, who would come back if all the versions were consistent. And then earlier you said, well, I mean, this is just something that's tacked on at the end. I mean, throughout this conversation, you've alluded to the fact that, like, you just don't think that the first vision, the inconsistencies in the first vision, are really worthy of being something that
Boy, you're
impinges somebody's
throwing that worthy
faith.
in at me to just like trigger me, aren't you?
A little bit, yeah, because I feel like all of a sudden you're taking like the opposite position of like, oh yeah, no, it's totally. I mean, it's if you don't like it,
I don't like the way you're saying it. I don't like that way. I don't like the use of the word worthy.
So
I hate that.
I still, maybe I didn't say my point of view very clearly, but I'm still curious, Glenn, if we go through your thought exercise, what about the first vision story is compelling? What's unique? What gives it merit to consider it, outside of considering any of the other stories that are very similar to people having visions and seeing things? Like, if it was consistent, I don't know. For Mormons, what's special about it?
It validates Mormons, absolutely. It's an incredibly valuable narrative to validate the entire lifestyle and everything you sacrifice in being a Mormon. So there's
what about it is validating? Why?
Because God has restored prophets to the earth, and you're connected to them. And if you
Who's God? Which God? Who's God?
God the Father.
Like, who? Really? Oh, God the Father?
Yes.
Because that's not in all the. I mean, the thing is, you're alluding to facts that are in dispute among all of the things as being like what's so validating about that. That's why this is an issue.
But Jake, you're jumping tracks because Bob's asking me, and if you're sincere, you really want to know why would this be important or what would be special to a Mormon about this story. Then you've got to explain it and accept it. But you're like saying, no, that's stupid. Let's jump tracks and talk about how stupid this is. It's not reasonable for somebody to believe or have anything special about this. No, because there's inconsistencies. You were like trying to pin. You're like the Pharisees that were trying. And I'm like Jesus, and you're trying to. I'm hard-ass Jesus this time.
You're Jesus, huh?
Hard-ass Jesus is being hard.
What I was trying to point out.
Jesus.
What I was trying to point out, Glenn, is that I think if you remove the inconsistencies, you also remove the meat of the story, because then all that's left is the original story, which is the most boring one. And even if it wasn't the most boring one, and the original story was that he saw two personages, and they told him to restore the church, that story exists outside of Joseph Smith as well. There's nothing like, I still don't know why this is so important as a reason to be the basis for believing everything else, if that's the argument.
That's a fascinating question, because it wasn't always. I mean, we know that in the history of the church, I think Randy mentioned earlier that this really wasn't widely known until around 1838. I was doing the what's that Parley P. Pratt Science of Theology, something like that. And he's got this chapter talking about how awesome Joseph Smith is and all the reasons that he's awesome. And this book, I think, was written in 1854, 1856, something like this. He doesn't even reference the first vision. There's all these things in here that he talks about Joseph Smith, but it's not the first vision. And that's so jarring, because I was raised with the first vision being the cornerstone next to the Book of Mormon. It's either the Book of Mormon's cornerstone or the first vision. They're kind of interchangeable that way.
Or keystone.
Right, or keystone, yeah.
You never know which one's which.
Right. But I mean, so to your question, Bob, why is that story so important? At some point it shifted, and it may have had something to do with polygamy and the manifesto and... Okay, now what? Oh, well, let's focus on Joseph Smith and the first vision. It could be. I don't know. There's probably other people out there who
I think
researched that.
History shows that it was a retrofit, I guess, is the point. We may not know exactly when the retrofit happened, but as a story, it's not that exciting.
But wait, for every single Mormon, the millions of Mormons, it is. It is
because
it's
very
been
important to them as the linear starting point of the evolution of the founding of Mormonism, which is not accurate if nobody talked about it until 10 years later. So that's kind of a smoking gun there in a way.
But whether it's accurate or not, the fact. The veracity of the claims are irrelevant to the importance of the story to them. It's not.
Well, if that were true, we wouldn't be reading this document right now. If that were true, there would be really no reason to even have something addressing the multiple accounts of the first vision.
So what is it that I'm saying that you're saying isn't true, Jake?
If it were true that the details of the story are important, it's what the story validates that's important.
It's the way that the story functions, not how true it is. That's where the real value in the story is, how it's used by the group.
Yeah, but it's used. The way it's used is by taking excerpts from the actual account and repeating them. So when the excerpts from the account call into, when multiple accounts call into question the very excerpts that you're using to validate yourself, that's why it's an issue. That's why we have this document. That's why we have.
Is this the nerdiest conversation anyone could ever have?
It's close.
It's like a sci-fi.
I went through this. Can I just explain to you the experience that I just had? I just had a park, and I was listening to Glenn, and I was thinking, wow, he's making a really good point. He's very articulate, and that was very good use of words, and that's very convincing. And I was thinking about what he was saying, and then Jake came in. I was like, wow, that was really, really well put. And then I just stepped back for a second, and I said, wait a minute. Are they just fucking debating this first vision story? Like, really intelligent, and it was very well done, but I just thought this literally might be the nerdiest conversation ever.
Can I ask Glenn, I think this is fun, and I want to probe a little bit more. I think we're on. I think
we just proved that it's nerdy.
Yeah, because the nerds liking it.
It's fun. Oh my god, it's fun.
I stepped into that one.
Hey, Bob, I'm right with you. I'm nerding out. I'm the most pedantic person in this. Like, I'm driving myself nuts. Go ahead.
So here's my thought experiment. I think we all agree that the fact that it's revisionist history and that the first vision, capital F, capital V, didn't exist until many, many years later, that in and of itself is somewhat of a problem. And I guess the question that I was asking myself in my head was, how early or late does that revisionist history need to occur for this to affect how valuable the first vision is to me, like as a believer? So if somebody tells me, oh, this wasn't called the first vision until a year later or 5 years later or 10 years later, those are different levels of impact of what that means to me. But if somebody actually, like if we had a Hamer on here, somebody who knew, and they said, actually, the first vision didn't happen until 1927 as the revisionist history that it is now, that is the foundation of the Mormon Church, that would bother me a whole heck of a lot more than if it didn't happen until 1838. You see what I'm saying? So like maybe it's a sliding scale for everyone slightly differently, but I think that aspect of it is a big part of the issue for me anyway. Too nerdy?
Well, I got distracted that you still use the word heck.
Ah, Jesus.
That's not even in my vocabulary anymore.
I was trying to be Matt-like.
I'm trying to be like Matt.
No, that's you. That's a good point, though, because if this had the weight that it has today in the minds of Mormons, if it had the same weight with the people that joined the church in 1830, or the people that were influenced by Joseph from 1827 to 1830, that would be a lot more reassuring to me as a believer than if I found out that no one even knew about the first vision until the late 1830s, and maybe many until it was actually, they always call it the 1838 account, the Wentworth Letter. It wasn't published until 1842. So if I found out that 22 years after the story I was told when it happened in 1820, that the general membership didn't even know this story existed till 1842.
Yeah. Didn't David Whitmer say something like that? Like the David Whitmer's like, I never heard that.
Yeah, he did. This is why we need Hamer on, because
right.
he could just spout this stuff. Yeah, he's like, just push the button and have Hamer go.
How are we not doing an actual history kind of first vision thing without the actual expert that we have on our team?
He doesn't care about Joseph Smith anyway. He hates Joseph, but this is his busy time of year too with work. So
that's true.
Really? He is so overwhelmed right now. Okay, this is according to him, this is video season, and he's got requests from like a ton of people to make videos.
No, I was saying, really? He hates Joseph Smith?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you meant really he's busy.
No, he's bored. He's bored. He doesn't like Joseph Smith history.
Okay.
No.
But he knows it.
He knows it, but he's bored of it.
Yeah.
So
all right.
I can relate.
Well, I think I like what I like that question, Bob, because I think that gets at the root of why there really wasn't. There's only 2 sections of the Doctrine and Covenants that came out after Joseph Smith died. Like, they're never going to add another section to the Doctrine and Covenants in the LDS Church. And I think that it's like there's
the last one was 100 years ago, by the way.
There's like this kind of sense of almost artificially inflated nostalgia of like that was the time when scriptures came out. And so like if you found out that something that the first vision wasn't really a thing until like the 1920s or something like that, then you'd be like, well, great. I mean, I don't know. It doesn't seem far back enough to really be to tap into that nice ancient narrative, even though we're really only talking about the 1800s. I mean, it's incredibly recent, but I think that like there's something to that. I've never really thought about that before, but that's a really interesting point.
Yeah. So what's the year for everyone? Just yeah.
What's the cutoff year? I think I don't know.
I mean, as the non-believer now, it's not as big of a difference for all the reasons we stated of the first vision not being in the top 10 list or whatever. So whether or not it's 1840 versus 1920 isn't as big of a deal as it once used to be. But it's just the fact that it's 1840 and not 1821 or whatever. You know, that that there is a window, and it's a lot bigger than it should be, and. Yeah. Well,
it's just because as a believer, you're given such a tight, neat story of how you're almost given this idea that everyone kind of had a vision of what Salt Lake City was going to look like in 1995. Joseph Smith had that vision of, you guys don't understand this church any more than a babe on a parent's lap. This church is going to fill the world someday, and then they go back and they retrofit to the point where even Thomas Monson is acting like there's home teachers at the time of when Thomas Marsh left. Like right. everything was so clean and neat and orderly and not messy at all. And then when you go back and look at it, you realize how fucking messy it was.
But see, I remember. I got a question. I'm wondering if your guys' experience was the same. For me, the first vision story was so critical and so foundational because it supported the Book of Mormon, and then the Book of Mormon supported everything else. So for me, it flowed from the first vision, and I don't think I'm alone there. That the first vision does support the Book of Mormon. So the different stories, if you can break it down, that the church like the Book of Mormon existed before this story did, or the church existed before this story. I don't know. I think that makes less sense. Less sense to me. It makes this more of that important of a story.
So I remember being a seminary student, probably a junior or senior in high school, and having this epiphany in class. And I went and I told my teacher about it afterwards and said, you know what? Even if the prophet came out tomorrow and said, the Book of Mormon is not true, it's just a fake, it's a forgery, my testimony in the Book of Mormon is so strong, I would not believe him. I would think that he has been compromised. He's
deceived.
He's been deceived, and my testimony is so strong that even if there was evidence that the Book of Mormon wasn't true, I wouldn't believe it. I would think that it was planted by the devil. Blah blah blah. So that was my mindset at the time. So to go to your question, Bob, what's your year? If somebody would come to me and said the first vision story, there's multiple versions, and we didn't start doing this one until 1965. I wouldn't have cared, because if the prophet says that this is the right one, it doesn't matter with the other. I can turn off my brain. I don't have to think about those things because I've got faith in the prophet, and that's where I was at that time. Now, if you asked me in my mid-20s or in my mid-30s, I would have given you different answers then.
Yeah,
but that's why I feel like when we get into our ex-Mormon, let's bash on all things Mormon stuff, it just gets so like overdone, and like I've been thinking a lot about echo chambers.
Okay.
So I'm responding to the whole echo chamber thing. It's been in my mind. Like, why is Glenn being such an asshole tonight? Because he's thinking about echo chambers and like not wanting things to go unchallenged. So I start thinking, well, what are we doing? Are we just looking for our own pat on the back validation, and we prop up things like the first vision narrative and all the inconsistencies to be much more of a smoking gun evidence that validates our own decision to leave the church, and anybody who comes along and challenges that, then we're going to attack, because how dare they attack our in-group? This is sacred territory, kind of thing. So that I've got a concern that happens. Put it that way.
Yeah. While you were talking, I was just checking out some stuff online, and Jan Ships and some other Mormon scholars have pointed to some of their work that suggests that the year is 1840 in terms of like any awareness at all, but even then it was pretty light. And then in terms of like hymns and people talking about it and calling it the first vision, that's more in the late 1800s. So there was a hymn written and a first depiction of it made, and this was all like around 1869 to 1884. So I mean, there's not like one magic year anyway, but I guess I don't know if this just to put a cherry on top of the cake, that's kind of the reality of it. Is first mentioned 1840, but nobody really cared, and then slowly became canonized as a big deal in the late 1800s. So does that change anybody's opinion about anything, or is it about what you thought? That's what you said already, Glenn, I guess.
It's about what I thought now, but it's certainly would have been disconcerting depending on when it was. There was a time when I was like Glenn described, and that's the power of the testimony culture within the church. Is you feel like they nurture and foster building a testimony, and then you get to the point where you feel so strong about it emotionally that I said this once. There's nothing I could ever learn or come across that would break my testimony. But then my testimony did break at the right time, and so it would have been a shock if presented to me at the right time in my life, to find out that nobody in the early church was converted by the first vision. Yet, I spent 2 years given the first discussion where that was the highlight, that was the climax of the first discussion. Right off the bat, we talk about the first vision. And
you have your climaxes right off the bat, Randy?
Oh, gosh.
Well, pretty quick.
Okay.
Yeah. I wouldn't say right on go.
So, I mean, I'm glad that you have taken this particular bent on this conversation, Glenn, because I think it's been an important, I really like having that perspective to bounce off of, because I don't know. I think you're right to challenge that and to be mindful of, not creating too much of an echo chamber, I guess. But I also want, and I'm kind of reacting from the other side of from the people that do see this as an issue and saying, well, this is worth really looking into. This is worth addressing. This is enough of an issue that there was, a concerted effort to create at least a document that references the primary historical documents, and there's enough of an issue to create an alternative video version depiction of this event that acknowledges the plurality of events. So, I guess I don't really know where I'm getting at, but I think that you've. I think it's an important perspective. I'm glad that you have been mindful of that. And
I don't want to belabor the conversation any longer than we have to. I don't. It doesn't seem like the smackdown idea is really working, because we're not going back to the document, which is fine. But when you look at that movie, that new video that's out, what do you see that is so different between that and other video depictions of the first vision that you've seen before? Because it didn't seem that strange to me. It didn't seem that it was that different.
It really wasn't. I think that the thing that really surprised me is the passage that missionaries all over the world are memorizing in the language of their assigned mission to recite to the people that they're teaching is not in this video. And this is the first time I've seen a depiction of the first vision that said, I saw a pillar of light directly over my head above the brightness of the sun. It descended gradually until it fell upon me. Like there's a big section of the 1838 account that has become that has become the go-to account of the first vision, and that's not in this video. And I think that means something, because if it didn't mean anything, if that particular passage wasn't really important, it wouldn't have been repeated so many times.
I don't think I have the passage that you've got in your brain. We may not have memorized that in my mission, or maybe the Japanese.
It was part of the first. Of course, it was. It was in. Didn't everybody memorize that?
I don't.
Yeah, I was in mine.
I had to memorize the Pearl of Great Price version.
Really?
Yes.
I mean, we didn't do that.
Yeah.
I'm sure you did, Glenn. I'm 100% positive it was in the first. I mean, I don't know if it was in the first discussion. I don't know how the discussions were.
We said, "Watashi no mina ni yote kami-sama ni shinjite imasu." We, like everybody else in the world, believe in God. That was like our leading thing, but I don't remember. And maybe it was because I was doing it in Japanese instead of English. I just have flushed it, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I mean,
so what details were omitted? So it was just that text was different. It's still telling the basic story, but it wasn't saying it in those words.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. I guess that particular passage is at the core of every video depiction of the first vision that I've ever seen. Is he goes out, he has these questions, he goes out the sacred grove, he kneels down, darkness comes over him, and then the darkness comes over him, and then and visually it's depicted in kind of the same way. I mean, it is always kind of updated to whatever decade, like the film tropes of whatever decade it was produced. But it goes dark. There's some sort of like the light starts at some particular part in the screen, and then it fills the whole screen. This is, I saw a pillar of light directly over my head above the brightness of the sun, descended gradually until it fell upon me. And it goes through this very specific, 2 or 3 paragraph passage of the 1838 account, word for word. Every single video depiction I've ever seen goes through that particular passage, word for word. And this did. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. Yeah, and Glenn, just to be more precise, you were talking about like the first paragraph of the first discussion with what you were just saying in Japanese. Yeah. And at least on my mission, Joseph Smith's story, or in the discussions, if I remember correctly, doesn't show up until like the third discussion or later. But we had a separate.
No.
Wait.
No, you're wrong. You're wrong. The first discussion, the first principle is about God, and then like the. I don't know. Did you have the 6 discussions, Bob? Are you old enough for that? Okay.
Yes, I had the 6 discussions. The first one was about planet salvation. Second one was Jesus. Third one was restoration. And then there was a separate brochure about Joseph Smith that we had.
Joseph Smith was in the first discussion. I guarantee you that.
Not in this level of detail.
No, yeah, I think you're both right.
Like So all I'm saying is my original point was we had a separate Joseph Smith brochure that we would often whip out if the audience was getting bored by just like standard Christian tropes from the first and second discussion. Like, yeah, Jesus, whatever. Yeah, everybody does that. And we're like, no, but we got this dude. And we had this like translated Bulgarian pamphlet, and it was just like that same passage that Jake was quoting, like front and center, and it was really popular. Like it did way better than the first 2 discussions. And so all I'm saying is the Joseph Smith light mentions, whatever they are, Randy, in the first 2 discussions, they totally sucked. And we had to go straight to that pamphlet, and it was the 1838 account, and it did wonders. People loved that story.
Yeah, it wasn't detailed like the Joseph Smith history of the Pearl of Great Price,
like the third discussion where it's very detailed. Yeah,
but because this was like shortly before I started my faith crisis. I was a pretty active Mormon missionary or member missionary, and I just remember going to this lady's house on splits that I had referred the missionaries to, so they wanted me to go on splits with them to teach the first discussion. I remember that Joseph Smith story coming up and just feeling like for the first time ever embarrassed by how unbelievable the story was. Like, how am I this woman from the South who's probably Southern Baptist, and I'm telling her this story about some white boy, and she was black, some white boy back in the 1820s went to the grove and God and Jesus came, and I'm like expecting her to respond and believe it. And that was the last time I was a member missionary. That was 2005. But I don't know. I think Jake has a really good point that this it wouldn't exist in this form, and with that, preface that they have in that video, if it wasn't something that they felt was important to address.
Yep.
But but at the same time, I also want to acknowledge Glenn's point that this really isn't that different from the other depiction. I mean, I'm probably making a bigger deal of it because it doesn't contain the one passage that I had to repeat to hundreds of people when I was a missionary, and that all the missionaries that I know memorized. And I always accept it as the definitive version of it, which doesn't contain one of the key, what I see as one of the key facts. But, to Glenn's point, like, the story is bigger than its details in terms of the role that it plays in the Mormon narrative.
I find the cinematography choices, the differences in how they did that, more interesting.
Yeah.
I've said this many times. My mission president was once the president of Bonneville Communications, which means back in the day when Mr. Kruger's Christmas and Together Forever and What Is Real were made, and On the Way Home, he made all those movies. And his big epiphany on what he wanted to do in life was when he went to go see the movie Oh God. And the reason why was because the movie told the perspective from John Denver, the protagonist in the movie. He was trying to convince. Well, he took the movie took the audience through John Denver's eyes, and he had actually seen God, and God had told him to do something. And that's when he realized the power of movies in trying to convince people, to get people on the side of the person who's in it. And to me, this movie was done from the perspective as if, they didn't use multiple camera angles, no close-ups. They didn't use very fancy special effects. They went for kind of this gritty, as if you were somehow able to be hiding in a bush in the sacred grove. And when it starts, it doesn't focus on Joseph Smith. It focuses on the spot where it happens.
Right.
And you hear footsteps, and then Joseph Smith walks into the scene. And to me, that's saying that this isn't about Joseph Smith. So don't make this about Joseph Smith. This is about this event that God wanted to happen so he could restore the gospel again to the earth. And then they keep it on just a single camera from a distance to just make it feel like a fly on the wall kind of effect. And and then Satan comes, and it's not real spectacular. They don't have, an Amityville horror type, CGI effects where Satan comes in. All you see is the leaves on the ground starting to turn a charcoal color.
And then he hugs himself and falls over. I didn't get the whole hugging yourself as a thing that Satan's around. I don't understand that.
But if you watch the approach of Satan, the leaves turn charcoal in a path towards him. Satan is a physical presence. He's walking towards Joseph Smith, but they don't want to overdo it, so they just have the leaves indicate where Satan's walking towards them, and then he envelops them. Yeah, and then Joseph Smith hugs himself and asks for mercy from God. And then everything goes black. And then you have the Father and the Son. And I don't know if there's any way to make that not look hokey.
They did okay.
Is there any amount of CG that can make that not look hokey? Because
they pulled back a bit. You can't quite see their images, and you don't know exactly what the celestial skin color is. You don't know if they're like, if they're pasty white boy white, or if they're more like, European white, if they're gonna burn in the sun, or if they're gonna tan well. They make it so that all flavors of white are acceptable.
Well, there's also this really cute detail where Jesus is standing closer to Joseph Smith, and I guess Elohim's a little bit behind. And I don't know, how the physics works with resurrected gods. But they're floating. They're not going to lower themselves to actually walk on the earth. They're floating. But then in this one moment, Jesus steps down from thin air to the lower thin air.
Yeah,
you
I
guys
saw
need
that.
to watch it again. Like he takes a step down.
Yeah, I am. I'm actually watching it right now. Yeah, he draws in a little bit. I'm going to slum it with this guy right now, real quick.
Yeah, let me step a little bit closer to the earth, but not all the way.
Right.
Was anybody else annoyed that the way they encoded this thing, that the high res version was only 720p? Even if you wanted to download it and watch it on your big screen, it would come through pretty grainy and crappy. Like, where's you put the money in? Why not release like a home theater version?
Because they want it to look like a home video of something that actually happened.
Maybe.
No, it would be like handheld if they wanted to do that.
They don't want to make you dizzy.
Blair Witch.
You can't even see his face. Like, it's really poor quality, the actual file they use to distribute it, even though the quality of the filming and the production value itself is good. It's just like a real shame. You can't really experience it the way it should be experienced. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and then the single camera.
I was waiting for it.
I liked his blue vest.
So
his blue vest.
That's what
it was a snappy vest. I like. I didn't really think about the implications of like the. Well, I guess it's not. It's probably not a continuous shot, but it's like three long shots that are stitched together. One up until it goes dark, and then one where they put God and Jesus in there, and then another one for when he woke up, and it pans up to this wide frame shot. But I didn't really think about the implications of, like, it's not about Joseph Smith, it's about the event that happened, and that feeds into what Glenn has been trying to say this whole time, which is it's not for members and for people that believe it. It's not really about like the details of all of these accounts. It's about the story, the broader story that is being told by this.
So, but I also want to ask, though, that's all well and good, but was that axe? Was he using that axe with his blue vest, or was it just there stuck from the last person in that grove? I'm just wondering the significance of the axe in the scene. Anyone else?
It showed that Joseph Smith was, hardworking, honest
with his
young man,
not a vest. Yeah, not
a treasure digging occultist. He was just a really hardworking farm boy that, was just an honest, good American.
That church attire is what you use when you're swinging an axe, for sure.
The original Abe Lincoln. Splitting rails and seeing God.
Is the fact that it was just a 6-minute version just because of internet attention span purposes?
Sounds about right. It worked for me. I liked it, actually, as film, as capital F filmmaking.
What'd you give it?
Yeah, how many stars? How many stars from the bomb scale?
I didn't see that Facebook status update. 4 out of 5.
Wait, 4 out of 5 is grading on a curve of.
It's depicting
for a religious institution making film.
Yeah, sure. I'm just saying. I knock off a star for the hugging himself scene, but otherwise I was impressed. It was good.
Didn't you say something, Bob, that you thought maybe the fuzziness and being the shot being a long shot was to not really focus on really how young a 14-year-old boy is?
Yeah, like you can't really tell. He looks and talk because he's narrating as if it's many years later, so he's a man talking about it. And then when you see him, it's just far enough away that he's not boyish looking. He looks like a young man, but we all know he's 14 from the story. But then if you were to show a 14-year-old kid, he wouldn't look this good. He'd have pimples and.
But remember, they were doing an amalgamation of all of the different versions, and some of them have him as old as 16. So we probably shouldn't assume that they had 14 in mind. He was in the 13 to 16 age.
Right.
And like any good origin story,
how old he was, just that he was, and it was
like any good origin story. The hero isn't usually a late bloomer, so we assume that he was like a pretty manly man by this time.
Yeah,
I guess.
Yeah, I think I was taught that Nephi was 14 at the beginning of the Book of Mormon, but he was fully mature. You know, he hit puberty really early, like at 9.
Who's the Book of Mormon guy who hit puberty at 17? Do we have one? No, I don't think so. I just.
I think like Mormon or Moroni hit puberty at like 9.
No, I think Moroni was a grandfather at 17.
He was like the Joint Chiefs of Staff at 6. He was the commander of all the armies of all the Nephite nations at like age 15 or 16.
Yeah. Everything starts early. Yeah. It's too bad that nowadays you have to be fucking 80 years old before you have any authority. Back in the day, God started you young. How the times have changed.
Those were scripture times, Bob.
Yeah, as opposed to now when modern revelation is a trickle out of the faucet.
It's like one of those stalactites that drips once every 15 months.
Yeah, pretty much. The same flow as the pee of the general authorities. All right, that went too far. I'm sorry.
All right, I think we're hitting the bottom here.
The wine was talking. I didn't mean that. I'm sure. How do I
Bob would like to apologize to the octogenarian urination habits.
Yeah. I have trouble peeing too from time to time. And I will when I'm old too.
Yeah.
Does this help?
Get your prostate checked, dude.
Yeah.
Now, the infants read accounts of the first vision. We'll start with Glenn reading the 1832 version. At about the age of 12 years, my mind became seriously impressed with regard to all important concerns for the welfare of my immortal soul, which led me to searching the Scriptures, believing as I was taught that they contained the Word of God, thus applying myself to them, and my intimate acquaintance with those of different denominations led me to marvel exceedingly, for I discovered that they did not adorn their profession by a holy walk and godly conversation agreeable to what I found contained in that sacred depository. This was a grief to my soul. Thus, from the age of 12 years to 15, I pondered many things in my heart concerning the situation of the world of mankind, the contentions and divisions, the wickedness and abominations, and the darkness which pervaded the minds of mankind. My mind became exceedingly distressed, for I became convicted of my sins. And by searching the Scriptures, I found that mankind did not come unto the Lord, but that they had apostatized from the true and living faith. And there was no society or denomination that being built upon the gospel of Jesus Christ as recorded in the New Testament. And I felt to mourn for my own sins and for the sins of the world. For I learned in the Scriptures that God was the same yesterday, today, and forever, that he was no respecter to persons, for he was God. For I looked upon the sun and the glorious luminary of the earth, and also the moon rolling in their majesty through the heavens, and also the stars shining in their courses, and the earth also upon which I stood, and the beasts of the field, and the fowls of heaven, and the fish in the waters, and also man walking forth upon the face of the earth in majesty, and in the strength of beauty, whose power and intelligence in governing the things which are so exceeding great and marvelous, even in the likeliness of him who created them. And I was considered upon these things, that my heart exclaimed, well hath the wise man said, that it is a fool that saith in his heart there is no God. My heart exclaimed, all these bear the testimony and bespeak an omnipotent and omnipresent power, a being who maketh laws and decreeth and bindeth all things in their bounds, who filleth eternity, who was and is and will be from all eternity to eternity. And when I considered all these things, and that being seeketh such to worship him as worship him in spirit and in truth, therefore I cried unto the Lord for mercy, for there was none else to whom I could go and obtain mercy. And the Lord heard my cry in the wilderness,
And while in the attitude of calling upon the Lord, in the 16th year of my age, a pillar of light above the brightness of the sun at noonday came down from above and rested upon me. And I was filled with the Spirit of God. And the Lord opened the heavens upon me. And I saw the Lord. And he spake unto me, saying, Joseph, my son, thy sins are forgiven thee. Go thy way, walk in my statutes, and keep my commandments. Behold, I am the Lord of glory. I was crucified for the world, that all those who believe on my name may have eternal life. Behold, the world lieth in sin at this time, and none doeth good, no, not one. They have turned aside from the gospel, and keep not my commandments. They draw near to me with their lips, while their hearts are far from me, and mine anger is kindling against the inhabitants of the earth, to visit them according to their ungodliness, and to bring to pass that which hath been spoken by the mouth of the prophets and apostles. Behold, and lo, I come quickly, as it is written of me in the clouds, clothed in the glory of my Father. And my soul was filled with love, and for many days I could rejoice with great joy, and the Lord was with me. But I could find none that would believe the heavenly vision. Nevertheless, I pondered these things in my heart.
Next, we have Randy with the 1835 version.
I commence giving him a relation of the circumstances connected with the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, as follows: being wrought up in my mind respecting the subject of religion, and looking at the different systems taught the children of men, I knew not who was right or who was wrong, and considering it of first importance that I should be right in matters that involve eternal consequences, being thus perplexed in mind, I retired to the silent grove, and bowed down before the Lord, under a realizing sense that he had said, if the Bible be true, ask, and you shall receive. Knock, and it shall be opened. Seek, and you shall find. And again, if any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not. Information was what I most desired at this time, and with a fixed determination to obtain it, I called upon the Lord for the first time, in the place above stated, or, in other words, I made a fruitless attempt to pray. My tongue seemed to be swollen in my mouth, so that I could not utter. I heard a noise behind me, like some person walking towards me. I strove again to pray, but could not. The noise of walking seemed to draw nearer. I sprung up to my feet, and looked around, but saw no person or thing that was calculated to produce the noise of walking. I kneeled again, and my mouth was opened, and my tongue liberated, and I called on the Lord in mighty prayer. A pillar of fire appeared above my head. It presently rested down upon me, and filled me with joy unspeakable. A personage appeared in the midst of this pillar of flame, which was spread all around, and yet nothing consumed. Another personage soon appeared, like unto the first. He said unto me, Thy sins are forgiven thee. He testified unto me that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And I saw many angels in this vision. I was about 14 years old when I received this first communication.
And finally, we have Bob with the 1838 version.
I was at this time in my 15th year. My father's family was proselyted to the Presbyterian faith, and 4 of them joined that church, namely, my mother Lucy, my brothers Hiram and Samuel Harrison, and my sister Sophronia. During this time of great excitement, my mind was called up to serious reflection and great uneasiness. But though my feelings were deep and often poignant, still I kept myself aloof from all these parties, though I attended their several meetings as often as occasion would permit. In process of time, my mind became somewhat partial to the Methodist sect, and I felt some desire to be united with them. But so great were the confusion and strife among the different denominations that it was impossible for a person young as I was, and so unacquainted with men and things, to come to any certain conclusion who was right and who was wrong. My mind at times was greatly excited. The cry and tumult were so great and incessant. The Presbyterians were most decided against the Baptists and Methodists and used all the powers of both reason and sophistry to prove their errors, or at least to make the people think they were in error. On the other hand, the Baptists and Methodists in their turn were equally zealous in endeavoring to establish their own tenets and disprove all others. In the midst of this war of words and tumult of opinions, I often said to myself, what is to be done? Who of all these parties are right, or are they all wrong together? If any one of them be right, which is it, and how shall I know it? While I was laboring under the extreme difficulties caused by the contests of these parties of religionists, I was one day reading the Epistle of James, 1st chapter and 5th verse, which reads, If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. Never did any passage of Scripture come with more power to the heart of man than this did at this time to mine. It seemed to enter with great force into every feeling of my heart. I reflected on it again and again, knowing that if any person needed wisdom from God, I did. For how to act I did not know, and unless I could get more wisdom than I then had, I would never know. For the teachers of religion of the different sects understood the same passages of Scripture so differently as to destroy all confidence in settling the question by an appeal to the Bible. At length I came to the conclusion that I must either remain in darkness and confusion, or else I must do as James directs, that is, ask of God. I at length came to the determination to ask of God, concluding that if he gave wisdom to them that lacked wisdom, and would give liberally and not upbraid, I might venture. So in accordance with this, my determination to ask of God, I retired to the woods to make the attempt. It was on the morning of a beautiful, clear day, early in the spring of 1820. It was the first time in my life that I had made such an attempt, for amidst all my anxieties, I had never as yet made the attempt to pray vocally. After I had retired to the place where I had previously designed to go, having looked around me and finding myself alone, I kneeled down and began to offer up the desires of my heart to God. I had scarcely done so when immediately I was seized upon by some power which entirely overcame me, and had such an astonishing influence over me as to bind my tongue so that I could not speak. Thick darkness gathered around me, and it seemed to me for a time as if I were doomed to sudden destruction. But exerting all my powers to call upon God to deliver me out of the power of this enemy which had seized upon me, and at the very moment when I was ready to sink into despair and abandon myself to destruction, not to an imaginary ruin, but to the power of some actual being from the unseen world who had such marvelous power as I had never before felt in any being, just at this moment of great alarm, I saw a pillar of light exactly over my head, above the brightness of the sun, which descended gradually until it fell upon me. It no sooner appeared than I found myself delivered from the enemy which held me bound. When the light rested upon me, I saw two personages, whose brightness and glory defy all description, standing above me in the air. One of them spake unto me, calling me by name, and said, pointing to the other, This is my beloved Son, hear him. My object in going to inquire of the Lord was to know which of all the sects was right, that I might know which to join. No sooner, therefore, did I get possession of myself so as to be able to speak, than I asked the personages who stood above me in the light, which of all the sects was right, for at this time it had never entered into my heart that all were wrong, and which I should join. I was answered that I must join none of them, for they were all wrong. And the personage who addressed me said that all their creeds were an abomination in his sight, that those professors were all corrupt, that they draw near to me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They teach for doctrines the commandments of men, having a form of godliness, but they deny the power thereof. He again forbade me to join with any of them, and many other things did he say unto me, which I cannot write at this time. When I came to myself again, I found myself lying on my back, looking up into heaven. When the light had departed, I had no strength, but soon recovering in some degree, I went home. And as I leaned up to the fireplace, Mother inquired what the matter was. I replied, Never mind, all is well, I am well enough off. I then said to my mother, I have learned for myself that Presbyterianism is not true.
How's it going?
Good. So we're recording again, Jake.
All right, Sounds good.
Oh, what did I miss?
Just
nothing. Shaving
how to
balls.
shave your balls.
How to shave your balls. There
That
was
is
a
what you
tutorial. It was great.
How do you shave your balls?
How do you shave yours, Bob?
Let me rephrase the question. What did I miss?
Yeah.
I use little scissors.
That's not a bad technique either.
For listening to Infants on Thrones.